Hey everybody, Gabe here from the Spine Crackers podcast. I just wanted to do a video today on a little miniature book haul, I suppose, that I procured on my recent trip to Nashville, Tennessee. I was able to get to a few, just two really bookstores down there, and I only bought books from one of them, but I'll talk about both, I guess. I picked up a bit of a random smattering of books, some nonfiction, some fiction. So if nonfiction is not really your thing, then feel free to click away because there's going to be a significant amount of that in here. And yeah, I just thought I would talk through what I got, why I got it, and how cheap I got it for. If you are interested, if you enjoy this, obviously like, subscribe, YouTube. We also have our Patreon link in the description, as well as our Buy Me a Coffee link. I did post a preview picture of all these books as I purchased them on our Discord, which you can gain access to by subscribing to the Patreon. So hope to see you all over there at some point soon, because it's popping. All right, so the first book I got here is this one. It's called New Ideas from Dead Economists by Todd Buchholz. Buchholz, I don't know a lot about him personally, but the blurbs and all of that sort of lead me. The one on the front here is from William F. Buckley. We got Milton Friedman and the Wall Street Journal on the back here. Lead me to believe that Buchholz is, going to be something of a neo-lib, if not an out-and-out conservative, which of course is fine. Shout outs to all of our conservative audience. I don't know if we have a conservative audience, but shout outs if you're there. I just realized there's an old Borders receipt in this book, which is pretty epic. Anyway, and so this is a popular economics book written for a popular audience. This isn't an academic text or a textbook or anything of that nature. But the reason that I bought it, and there's going to be another book on economics coming up here next, is that I frankly don't know a lot about economics. I have some basic understandings about some basic concepts. I've read some very basic introductory texts. Oxford does those very short introduction books, which are all excellent as far as I've read them. And I did read one of those on economics, but I didn't retain a ton, frankly, because, economics is one of the subjects that I have a sort of abstract interest in, but I can rarely get up the energy or focus to actually sit down and read much of about economics. Part of that, I think, is because I'm just terrible at math, and I know that economics at the academic level involves a lot of sometimes very complicated mathematics, and that's just not my wheelhouse. So this one I thought might be a decent place to start in terms of getting a little bit of economic history, a little bit of sort of basic conceptual frameworks. Now, again, obviously, I have some suspicions about Buchholz's orientation and the perspective that he's coming from, so we'll see how that comes through in the actual text, if at all. But that was sort of the motivation behind that one. And similarly, the motivation behind the next one that I picked up, which is Money by Felix Martin, the unauthorized biography. Similarly, not an academic text, but it does have a significant number of citations, references, things like that, which this one, as far as I can tell, does not have. So maybe a little bit more rigorous in terms of research, in terms of demands that it puts on the reader. Maybe we'll see. And I got this one because money as a concept has always been really fascinating to me, because it feels just intuitively to me totally made up and fictional in a lot of important ways. And from what I could tell about this book, reading the flaps and some of the blurbs and so on, that's essentially Martin's conclusion, that money is a fiction, and economists don't even really have a good idea about exactly what it is or how it functions. Maybe that's false. If there's any economists out there who want to come yell at me about this on Discord, please join the Patreon, and you're more than welcome to do so. But I think maybe this will be something of a counterpoint to what I suspect or expect will be a little bit more of an orthodox perspective that is going to come out of the Buchholz book. So I thought it would just be a sort of interesting pair of books to potentially read together at some point down the road. I should say I got this. This I think was the most expensive book that I bought, actually, at about $8. And this nice hardcover edition of Money was $5. I purchased all of these books at McKay's in Nashville, which is a sort of it's kind of like a half-price books type deal. It's a big old warehouse, and they sell used books, DVDs, video games, electronics. I think they have musical instruments there. Really a nice store with a wide selection. I did also go to another bookstore when I was in Nashville called Elders Bookshop, and that one was more of just an academic trip for me. I was on something of a budget when I was doing my book shopping while I was there, and they specialize more in, Elders Bookshop does more in sort of antiquarian, rare, collectible books. They had aisles and aisles, like literally multiple aisles, all dedicated to, with these obscure volumes of Tennessee history and the history of Nashville. And they had like old volumes of like divorce records and stuff like that. Very, very kind of weird, obscure local stuff. So that was really interesting to peruse, but everything there was like, $40 and up mostly that I could tell. And I wanted to come away with more than one book, ideally. So I didn't actually buy anything there, but a really interesting bookstore if you're ever in Nashville. So go check out Elders. Okay, the next one I got is in a similar vein to the first two, in the sense that it was motivated by a feeling that I've had recently, or a thought that I've had recently about a subject that I kind of realized that I didn't know a lot about, and that's World War I. This book here is by S.L.A. Marshall, who was a brigadier general in the United States Army, I think, during World War II. And then he kind of transitioned into the role of military historian / journalist. I don't think he ever held any academic posts or anything like that. And again, this is not a academic text. There are not a lot of citations or references or anything like that. Sort of written, again, in a more popular style for a more popular audience. But, I think a lot of us, at least in America and probably around the world, absorb at least some amount of information kind of through cultural osmosis, whether that's through, Ken Burns documentaries or, other types of fiction or film that we consume about, for example, World War II, right? Or Vietnam, maybe, or the Revolutionary War. But World War I is one of those events that I feel like is kind of given short shrift culturally. There's not a lot of, I don't want to say not a lot, but not as many works that deal with that time in history. And of course, it's one of the most pivotal moments in history, both from a sort of military, technological, and kind of global world orientation perspective, but also specifically for people who are interested in literature. World War I was, in a lot of ways, the founding moment of modernism as a sort of artistic movement, because the modernists were kind of, obviously this is reductive, but a group of people who were kind of trying to grapple with, what just happened in World War I, and what does it say about humanity? What does it say about history? What sorts of artistic approaches can we take to kind of help us make sense of this and put the pieces back together of the world that we used to know? But as a sort of factual matter, in terms of the events that happened, I know very little about it. I know I have the sort of basic, like very basic middle school, Franz Ferdinand, domino effect, etc. type understanding of World War I, but not much other than that. And so I thought this would be a decent entree into the subject. I did read a little bit that some of Marshall's methods and his research came after his death in the late 70s to be controversial among academics that study military history. But I think that was more of a methodological disagreement and not so much a disagreement about key facts. I think it was specifically about some theory that he had about what percentage of infantrymen actually fired their weapons during the major world wars. Um, that I don't know anything about that, but that's what I read. So, yeah. So I got this book. Oh, and I guess one of the other sort of precipitating events that led me to have this realization about my ignorance regarding World War One is that we did recently on the podcast a review of David Diop's recent novel "At Night All Blood Is Black," which tells the story of two black French African colonial soldiers who are brought in to World War One, and that was a story that was a sort of part of that history that I didn't know, and it got me sort of thinking about how much about World War One that I don't know in general, and so I thought let's try to remedy that. The next one I have here is Harry G. Frankfurt's On Truth. This is a very small volume, obviously. I don't know if I hold it up here, you probably can't tell, but it's quite small. Frankfurt was a well-known, well-respected professor of philosophy who taught at Princeton for a long time. He wrote a pair of texts in the mid-2000s, I think. Yeah, this is 2006. The first of which is called On Bullshit, which I keep in my car in the console. And I have not read this one, but he wrote this as a companion volume to that later. And I really love On Bullshit just because it's such a funny but also rigorous sort of work of popular philosophy, and I just kind of wanted to have both volumes, and so I picked up the other one. Okay, next up is another philosophical text, and this is Alistair McIntyre's collection of essays against the self-images of the age. And McIntyre, of course, very well known for his work After Virtue, which is sort of a comprehensive attempt at a takedown of modern moral philosophy, and arguing that we need to sort of make a return to a type of Aristotelian virtue ethic in light of the failures of the various modern moral theories. In that book, McIntyre talks a lot about Nietzsche as kind of one of the very few post-Aristotelian moral philosophers that he has any respect for, in the sense that he agrees with Nietzsche's diagnosis of the ways in which the various modern moral systems have failed. Of course, he disagrees with Nietzsche in what he sees as Nietzsche's kind of moral nihilism, and McIntyre advocates for a return to the sort of Aristotelian tradition. I have a lot of mixed feelings about After Virtue. I read it in graduate school, and I think it's a book that anyone who's interested in modern moral theory should read, but I don't think it is the sort of knockdown, drag-out argument against modern moral theory that a lot of people seem to think it is. I actually think some of his readings of Nietzsche in that book are actually kind of bad. Obviously, that's a can of worms. We can talk about that on Discord as well. But I wanted to get this book just because After Virtue is the only work of McIntyre's that I've ever actually read, and I wanted to try to round out my understanding of his work a little bit more fully. And this book is 23 essays over the course of under 300 pages, so he's covering a lot of ground in here quite quickly. And so I thought it would be a good way to, like I say, shore up some of my understandings of McIntyre's general view, set of views. All right, next up, I think this is the first fiction book here. This is Stefan, I want to say Zweig. Someone correct me down in the comments. His novella Confusion. I don't know a ton about Zweig. I'm just going to say it that way. I do know he wrote the Chess Story, which I've seen a few people do reviews of recently on YouTube. It was just sort of a name that I recognized. Obviously, the New York Review of Books editions are always eye catchers, and I thought it would be a nice kind of weekend read to pick up. I think, as far as I know, it's a story about kind of a depressed, down-and-out student who develops a kind of passionate intellectual relationship with a college professor, and kind of who pulls him out of this funk that he's in, and they have some fights and some back and forths and so on and so forth. not the most interesting conceit to me in terms of a plot line, but like I said, I think this will be a nice little weekend read at some point in the future. Next up, another philosophical text. This is Children, Rights, and Childhood by David Archard. I picked this one up because my field is educational policy and educational philosophy, and I think questions about the nature of childhood and some of the implications of childhood morally and politically are questions that we don't see addressed very much in either policy discussions or in philosophical discussions. It's kind of a an issue that a lot of people take for granted, I guess I'll say. In the West, particularly, maybe we have a sort of presumption that childhood is this intuitively obvious concept where until you hit the age of majority, 18, then you are considered a child and you are treated in a certain way. Obviously, we make some distinctions between, say, people who are 5 and people who are 16 or whatever. But Archard tries to analyze our understandings of childhood and the very concept of childhood itself from a philosophical angle. And he touches on a lot of diverse and interesting questions in here, just looking through the contents. He talks about, voting, sexual choice. He talks about the question of sort of competence to make decisions and where that cutoff ought to be morally, and how the moral distinctions there might sync up or not sync up with the legal distinctions that we've chosen to make in our society. He talks about questions about parents, specifically their rights and obligations towards children. Is the parenting role more of a sort of liberatory role where we want to be setting our children up to have more options as they go forth into life, or is it sort of a reductionist kind of merely protection or caretaking role? So I've actually cited Archard's work previously in things that I've written, but I don't think I've actually read this book. And so I wanted to go through his kind of more sustained approach to some of these topics, which I think are important. Okay, next up, I have William Faulkner's Absalom. I have never read this. And confession here, I've only ever read one Faulkner book in my life, and that was As I Lay Dying, all the way back in high school. I've just never had the occasion to read more Faulkner, and I figured that should be remedied. And so I picked up Absalom, which I've heard from many people is one of his best. So that's that. The next one here is a bit out of left field. It's Sahotra Sarkar's Molecular Models of Life, Philosophical Papers on Molecular Biology. And first of all, this book was an absolute steal. Most of these other ones I got for $3, $4, $5. This one, which is a academic philosophical monograph published by MIT Press, which I think if you try to find on Amazon right now, I don't think it's in active print anymore. You're going to have to get used copies, and most of them are like $50. I picked this up for $1.50 at McKay's. And I don't really know why that is. Maybe they just didn't really know what it was or what they had, or maybe they just assumed no one was going to pay $30 for a random philosophy book on molecular biology. Regardless, I grabbed it partially because it was so cheap, and I figured it would be. I knew it would be more expensive if I tried to get it elsewhere. It's funny how that works, right? Like you see a book, like I would never buy this book online or on Amazon or whatever. Like I would never search it out. I would never purchase it, certainly for any like significant amount of money. But you see it, it's $1.50. Why not? I'll say have some long-standing significant interest in philosophy of science generally, and specifically some of the questions that Sarkar is well known for addressing in his philosophical work, namely questions of biological reductionism and the nature of hereditarian thinking in biology. And he's a noted critic of both of those tendencies in biological thinking. And I similarly have reservations about biologically and certainly genetic hereditary reductionist arguments. I think they tend to cash out in pretty hideous political views. And so I was interested in this text, knowing Sarkar's sort of orientation, because I thought it might add a few more arrows to my quiver when I get into those inevitable and inevitably online arguments with people who hold those types of views. Of course, I think I'm fully expecting that a lot of this stuff in this book will go over my head. I'm not a biologist. I'm not a scientist. I have no training in the field, but I do have training in philosophy. Sarkar is a philosopher. He just happens to be a philosopher who also has a deep understanding of molecular biology, and so I'm hoping that I can at least wrap my mind around some of the arguments that he's making here in a way that is fruitful. I should also say, I guess, that Sarkar had a bit of a pretty serious Me Too type moment a few years ago. He was a professor at UT Austin, I think, and he was accused and found guilty of some very, very inappropriate behavior with some of his students. I think asking them to pose nude for photos for money and things like that. So, which I think is important, particularly in the field of philosophy, which has been kind of plagued by, rampant sexism and toxicity for a long time. That's part of the reason that I left the field as an academic enterprise. But so, yeah, there's that. All right. The last book that I have is Ivan Turgenev's Fathers and Sons. And I picked this up for a cool $2. This is a nice Norton critical edition, which includes obviously the text of the novel, but also a bunch of supplementary materials from letters that Turgenev wrote or excerpts from letters that Turgenev wrote that reference the text, some contemporary reviews that emerged addressing the novel. And I picked this up both because it's a nice little edition with some interesting materials in it, and because, spoiler alert, we're going to be reading this book on the podcast in a few months. And so I thought I might as well pick it up when I saw it. So that's basically it. That's my little mini kind of eclectic book haul from my trip to Nashville. I hope you found something interesting in this. And if you did, go ahead and like and subscribe. Excuse me, my dog's paws are digging into my back. Like, subscribe, links to the Patreon and the Buy Me a Coffee will be down in the description. Follow us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever your preferred social media experience is. And we will see you around. Thanks.